The boroughs are New York City. The burbs are everywhere else. Real estate is the ultimate game of risk and reward. It's the biggest investment most people ever make. Fortunes are made over a lifetime and lost in a day. And we're not playing with monopoly money. How do you stay ahead? Who's buying? Who's selling? And why? What do they know? We want the truth. You need an edge. Boroughs and Burbs is your secret weapon, giving you the insider knowledge and strategies you need to succeed in the high-stakes world of real estate. From Palm Beach to Palm Springs, Manhattan to Malibu, we press the experts to expose the pain, find the deals, and occasionally predict the future. That's Boroughs and Burbs, Thursdays, 3 o'clock Eastern, noon Pacific. Because everyone can make money in real estate.
Welcome, everybody. Boroughs and Burbs, number 200. I can't believe, Roberto, that we've gotten 200 of these. Who knew back 5 years ago that we would have the energy, the stamina to do 200?
You had the vision. You called me, you said, we should do a show. And I said, we should do what? And here we are.
And you know what? Looking back over the last 200 episodes, it's been an incredible variety. We've had the governor of Connecticut. We've had the CEO of Brown Harris Stevens. We've had designers, architects, landscape architects, builders. I mean, and we've been all over the world.
Mobile homes, storage facilities.
That's right.
Which I was like, this is going to be a snore, and it's fascinating.
Runs the whole gamut. And we've been all over the world as well. A whole lot in Europe. We've been to Mexico City.
Paris, Marbella, London, Dubai.
Is Panama really on sale? So well, thank you for the last 200 episodes, Roberto. So today, we brought back one of our favorites, right? We brought back Jonathan Miller.
He's the MVP.
I think this is my 7th time, I think.
Because ultimately, that's the only thing people want to know is how's the market? And you're our go-to on how's the market. But to add a twist this week, I asked Chuck Threshy of Total Mortgage, a guy who works for a national firm who's looking at the charts every day. And we brought him on to keep you honest. So hello, Chuck Threshy.
Hey, John. Hey, Roberto.
That's a heavy lift. So,
so I guess without further ado, let's get into it. Can you sum up the market, Jonathan Miller, in one word? What is 2025? I think you did at the beginning of the year. You tried to sum it up in a phrase. Is that phrase still hold?
I think I don't know. I don't know if I'm changing much, but I think it's just still confusing. I think that's the sort of the takeaway is it's just there's a lot of opportunities. As I said, we were talking earlier, as I said at this Rebney event a couple of days ago, that we really are it's dangerous to fall into any number of rabbit holes. And it's very easy to, especially with social media. So it's much harder to sort of stay on point and stick to actual facts and logic, which is always a challenge.
Where does the word confusing come from? Does it come from a red hot stock market at the highs and yet a general feeling among the homeowning public that things are not great?
So I think it's like we're sitting here and, the jobs numbers that got a BLS commissioner fired turns out a lot more negative than was when the numbers have been restated. And that's been for the last couple of months. At the same time, we have a lot of inflationary pressures with the tariffs and some other things, there's sort of the aggressive nature the administration is dealing with the Fed. All those are inflationary. So, and you look at grocery prices and a lot of stuff is way up, not all of it. So we have this inflation component. And then at the same time, we're talking about cutting rates, which is the opposite at the same time. And so I think that confuses consumers. You're not quite sure what to do with it.
Is part of the confusion that we have so many metrics these days? I remember you used to go out and you would go out into the marketplace and you would feel how the market felt and you would talk to your colleagues and this and that. But now it's like, it's not only the price per square foot, it's liquidity pace, it's market pulse, it's supply,
Right.
it's climate index.
Yeah, you wonder if you have the ability to process it, right? One of the things, one of the things that, is happened is we have a lot of information, but it's a lot of times it's not used properly, and a lot of times it's out of context. I'll give you an example. It's like I forget the actual description. It was a Redfin stat that said, this is the highest number of blown deals in history, right? And that's since 2017, right? I feel like 2017 is not history. It's like 8 years or 7 years. And then it gets repeated 1,000 times across the airwaves that we've had more deals fall apart. And actually, the reality, when you look at their numbers, all that happened was we went from about a 10% rate to about a 15% rate the moment in 22 when interest rates started to ratchet up at a fairly steep ascent. And it's not that blown deals are rising, they just went up a step and have stayed at about 15% since, according to their data. So even the description of it is inferring like the higher rates go, the more deals blow up, and it's simply not true, using their own metrics that they're touting. So I do have I have high regard for their chief economist and all that, but sometimes there's this pressure, people are hungry for news about the market. They want to report it to their clients and customers, but yet it's pardon my French, it's crap. It is not informative.
It's
And
the
there's just a
business.
lot of that. There's
It's
just
the business of selling the news too.
totally the selling the news as it's something to fill in a headline. And I'm not being cynical about the media or economists. I'm just saying that with all this information, there's and the role of an agent in this market is to tell the story. Like I always say this, I've said this before, like you're sitting in a Starbucks with your best friend. How would you tell them about the market if you're in real estate and they're not? Like, in just simple a simple narrative. And I think we're so worried about using all the bells and whistles that we don't necessarily fully understand, or they're not necessarily telling of your local market.
Right.
That's a great segue. I want to continue on this theme of confusion. Many call this the most data-driven market ever. You would think that with more data available to the average realtor and consumer than ever before, things would feel more certain. This morning, though, I got a request, what's my home worth? And the guy was sitting with the Zillow estimate said 2.4 million, and the Atom database said 1.2 million. And I said, wow. This is unusual. Generally, they're maybe 10% apart, and Zillow touts a national figure of being plus or minus 7% accurate before the realtor actually evaluates the house and puts
Before
it on
it's
the
listed.
market.
Yeah.
So
Wait, that's the median accuracy rate, John.
right.
So that means half the time it's within 7% and half the time it's not. So 7% is if it's not listed. If it is listed, it's 2%. That the median accuracy rate, but that means half the time it's within 2% and half the time it's not, which in my mind, it could be 150% off half the time, right? So it's sort of silly, but no one knows what the word median is. So they're not hiding anything. It's right there. But it's,
I use this as a way to really kind of illustrate what does confusion look like in the market when somebody can see data that's supposed to be accurate and vetted coming at them at the 1.2 million and the 2.4 million at the same time. What's a consumer to do? So no
right.
wonder
It's like that joke where, I think it was a commercial that had this, like, if it's on the internet, it must be true. If it's presented or printed, it must be true.
Right.
And
So my question is, what data points do matter? What data points should we be looking at? And I should be asking Chuck Threshy this as well, but you can begin. What data points matter? Because I think reading housingnotes.com, your newsletter every day, you have de-emphasized the Fed rate as a not as important data point, and you've
Right.
looked at other data points as more important. Could you go into that?
Well, so my big thing is transactional activity over pricing. So basically listings and contracts telling the story more than pricing. Pricing is, I always say, because I'm dating myself, it's the caboose on the end of the train, even though trains don't have cabooses anymore. But the idea is the intersection of supply and demand. So my number one favorite thing, and it can take different forms, is months of supply as a directional sort of pace of the market. And so months of supply is essentially the fraction is inventory in the numerator and sales in the denominator. And you can do that with contracts, closed sales, new listings, total listings, and develop a trend. And you can see markets slowing down before prices slow down, or stop rising. And so it's all about transactions lead price, even though people understand and want, they're trying to achieve the price that they want for their home. But they're sort of missing the point that when the dust settles, there's a lot of stuff up front. And that's that's sort of the general philosophy that I have about the way you think of the direction of a market. So, for example, as a broker or an agent, or even as a home seller, if the market is rapidly slowing down, you can see it in the months of supply, then as a seller, you probably don't want to be, you want to be a little bit more negotiable, or you're going to miss that market before something changes, or just the opposite, right? It's, there's some element of understanding the timing, the direction of the market.
Should I be looking at that nationally, or is that transaction lead price hyper
Okay,
local,
so
and it doesn't matter what's going on in Palm Beach to me in Connecticut?
right. So first of all, it doesn't
Okay.
matter. But the other thing is, the reason why you can't ignore the national, first of all, there is no national housing market. It's local, real estate is local, blah, blah, blah. But there's no national market. It's an aggregation of everything. I always say, and Chuck will probably have some words on this, is that housing is local and mortgages are more national in that context. I'm not saying that the mortgage rate is the same everywhere in the US, but that's why you have Fannie and Freddie, and you've created this sort of national sort of standards of mortgages, which is not my thing. But the thing is that your consumers are reading the national stuff. And so you have to be able to talk about it. Existing home sale numbers from NAR, or Case-Shiller Home Price Index, which says 6 months behind. When you get up in the morning, do you look at the average temperature 6 months ago? And that's how you decide what to wear that day. That's kind of like what Case-Shiller is. It's an academic exercise. It's national. If it relates to your local market, it's coincidence, is the way I look at it. Stick to local on housing, as local as you can.
We're talking about all these different data points. I still think that interest rates, although people should focus more on what their payments are and things like that, but even that dictates the payment. It dictates sentiment. It dictates everything. And right now, although this quarter point drop has been priced into long-term rates for 2 months, because it's coming, it's just priced in.
Right.
Which is, to me, is like a 2-month lag. or lead time into this.
Right.
Looking at the next couple of months where people are saying another, one more quarter point, whatever. Are we going to see that still begin to then price in so that our 6.4% 30-year jumbo is going to float to 6.2?
I mean, so the big answer to that is I have no idea.
Yeah.
Like, and so what I mean by that is the way to think, since August 1st, mortgage rates have fallen a little over 50 basis points. And so you could make the argument that the rate cuts were, it was already priced in, right? And be happy about that. That's a good thing. The sort of the idea, especially with tariffs and sort of the economic volatility that's sort of, floating around our economy, the uncertainty. Although I may have said this before, but and this idea of uncertainty, the way to think of, uncertainty is another way to describe what's going on, except for there's always uncertainty. There's low uncertainty, there's really high uncertainty, but there's always some element of uncertainty. What we have right now is a lack of clarity. We don't understand what's behind the rationale for a lot of policies coming out of Washington, which are impacting inflation and in fact impacting prices. One thing that is really fascinating to me, this was pointed out to me by somebody recently, is if you think of inflation pressures now, which are confusing, you have some grocery items that are, up 8% or whatever, and some that aren't, right? What's different about now and versus the pandemic is that inflationary pressures on pricing in the pandemic, it was prices that were rising. And so employers could justify wage increases to keep their employees. Today, the inflation is more cost increases. And so you're having layoffs. You're having a tremendous drop in job performance. So it's more serious, right? It's a different sort of animal. I thought that was, cost versus price is sort of changing the whole story.
And on that note, and what's interesting is this morning, the initial jobless claims came out and we're down 33,000. So, good news in the economy and the market is bad news for mortgage rates, right? Because then there's the flight to safety, which is the flight to the bond market. People go buy bonds, bond prices go up, and interest rates go down. And so we try to live in a very narrowly focused vision, because you talk about this confusion and all the data points, and there's no doubt there's an overwhelming amount of data and data points. I would just say that one day when you said you don't know what's going to happen, you don't have the crystal ball on rates, we don't either. I rely on 110 different economists to get me, to get my answer to a customer when they say, should we lock our rate or should we float it and wait to see if they go down?
And then ask how many economists you need to change a light bulb.
Right, exactly. So, I've said it every Monday in John's team meeting when I join them. I hate to say it, but bad news in the economy is good news for mortgage rates.
That's such a good point, Chuck. I totally agree. And the way to think of it is, weaker economic condition is good for, in a certain respect, good for housing because of interest rates, right? Interest rates go down to stimulate demand because the economy is sort of flailing. The problem is if it's too weak and you have job loss, a lot of job loss, we're at 4 point something in unemployment.
4.5.
The last recession, we're at 10%, right? So very different. So, last time I checked, I don't know if you can confirm this, Chuck, but you usually need a job to get a mortgage. And if you have a lot of people losing jobs through layoffs, then you have, a problem, another component of demand that's sort of, choked off.
There's no doubt.
So we don't want too much bad, but some bad is probably
that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Right. So we want a good economy, but we want, some numbers that help us with the, with the mortgage-backed securities, which is what we're priced off of, right? Those bonds.
Gotcha.
So yeah, it's a fine line. I don't want to go to 10% unemployment. Absolutely. That's a disaster.
And that's actually what college students coming out of college right now, it's about a 10% unemployment rate.
Yeah.
So there's
My-
segments of the economy, very specific segments that are currently being throttled that
Yeah.
many people don't actually experience or see.
My daughter graduated in May, and she got so frustrated with the interview process after a few months. She just sat through her 40-hour real estate class, John and team, and she graduated today and will sign up for getting her real estate license. And I'm in the back of my mind going, are you out of your mind?
All right, so I have a question, and this one for Roberto and Sally. You have to unmute yourself, but it occurs to me
Hey, Sally.
that New York City is 2/3 cash, and so mortgages and mortgage rates matter less. It also occurs to me that the profile of Vero Beach, Florida, historically, a lot of these people have tremendous amount of equity in their home, and they move to Vero Beach, and it's not a terrifically mortgage rate sensitive environment. So maybe you could comment on that, Roberto and Sally, whether that's changing, whether you have a different mix of buyers coming in. But it occurs to me that I'm in a interest rate sensitive environment because the biggest draw in New Canaan, Connecticut is the school system. So we historically have had a lot of young families coming in to avail themselves of the school system, and they sign up for mortgages. But maybe for the downsizers, and certainly the cash heavy New York City crowd, mortgages aren't playing that big a factor.
They haven't played that big a factor, and far less in the ultra luxury because they pay cash anyway. I mean, you have $20 million deals, they just write checks.
Right.
But as the interest rates do ease, the lower price points below 4 million, below 3 million, below 2 million, it generates activity because people start coming off of the, and what they should realize is that we're already a point better than we were, 18 months ago, I believe. And, showing them the difference of 1% is a big deal on your payment.
I'm going to be provocative. I'm going to say, shouldn't Roberto and Sally care more about the stock market?
Yes.
And
100%.
Thank you. Okay.
Interest rates, zero, nada, only in a broader confidence. It's a confidence. I'm in an elective secondary market, at least my sector of the market that I trade in happily. And it's a confidence. And what we have seen, tell me if you guys have seen the same. A couple of weeks of confidence, something happens, dashed. A couple of weeks of confidence, dash, the roller coaster goes down. So what we need is a longer, more protracted period of confidence. It's too easy to go, let's see what 6 months brings. We're not going to do that.
We're going through a period. So what I keep saying is bring back dull and boring. Because every week there's some, crazy event that happens and you're like frozen and you're wondering what to do. What's really interesting about the Manhattan data on cash, and there's locations in Florida that are heavy cash, obviously, like
80%. Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing. But the reason in New York, so right now, at least in the second quarter, we track it on a quarterly basis. Cash was 69.1%, which is the highest that I've tracked. I've been tracking it since 2014, so like 11 years. And the long-term average is like 50%, like right on the button. And when we had rates, during the pandemic that went really low, you could get a 30-year fix for 2 3/4. The market share of cash went to like in the low 40s. And then when mortgage rates, went up, especially with the Fed pivot in 2022, we started seeing it, 2/3 or almost 70%. And the way to think of it is, as you move higher in price point, there's less reliance on rates and more reliance on financial markets for alternative financing products. I think it's just common sense that somebody that has a wealth manager isn't paying 6.3% for a 30-year fixed right now if they are getting financing. And when mortgage rates are really low, we had, my appraisal company in New York, tons of deals where they were pulling out a $1 million loan on an $8 million property kind of thing because their financial advisor said you need the deduction or whatever. It wasn't to purchase, it was just a financial decision for them to do. So the way I think of cash right now, this isn't like some long-term, I think with rates, if they, and I'm not saying they're going to continue to fall like they've fallen, but lower rates reduce cash as a market share of the market. And one other sort of observation about that, when, if rates continue to fall, there's 2 more cuts this year forecast, doesn't mean that mortgage rates, as Chuck will tell you, there isn't a knee-jerk sort of direct connection. But if they continue to trend somewhat lower, you're going to see, the cash share really, continue to diminish. And not only that, but when you look at the market that's going to sort of resurgence, I can't speak, that it's going to be in the lower half of the market, which is more interest rate dependent. So you're going to have more people sort of trip into the housing market that have been on the sidelines, have been in the rental market, which is, in New York Metro has kept rents at, record levels. For example, Manhattan, in the first 8 months of 2025, 5 of those months have been all-time highs. 2 months have been the second highest in history by like $5. They just missed the record. And 1 month was the third highest in history. And that doesn't happen. Normally we see peak rents in the summer, and then sort of a reset in the fall. And we saw records starting at the beginning of the year, this year. And I think that's kind of, that run is over if rates continue to sort of slip a little bit, or, stay where they are. I don't think you're going to see rents on fire in major urban markets like you've been seeing it.
Yeah.
Those
There's
rents
a
are not
big,
those rents are not translating to higher prices, and basically, why isn't Roberto celebrating those 8 months of fantastic rent levels and a killer stock market?
So,
Why is he not dancing?
The way to think about it is, you have a cohort of the population that since 2022 have been waiting for rates to come down. They're waiting for the go signal. They're on the fence. And so they stay in the rental market organically longer than they would have if rates didn't go up at the highest ascent in the history of interest rates, right? And so they sort of are staying. So organically, the people that then would float into the rental market, entering, a region for the first time or whatever, there's like no vacancy, or it's very tight. Organically, if they had moved on to become first-time buyers, that's why first-time buyers are, so low right now. They're like nationally, I forget what it is. It's like 14% or some crazy low number. It's like the lowest in 10 years.
yeah.
So that's the reason.
The other interesting point on that, as far as the rent scenario, and you're much more dialed in on that than I am, but I do these rent versus buy demonstrations all the time right now, because sitting on the sidelines and waiting to buy is actually costing you. If you're waiting for rates to come down and you're still renting, you're losing that equity appreciation in your home. Because since 1940, we've been measuring housing prices, and they have gone up 93% of the time.
Right.
And the only 5 to 6 years in a row they were down was the Great Recession. the real estate bubble from 2007 to 2011 and 12. So other than that, they've gone up every single year. What fascinated me recently was I'm doing a loan in Connecticut right now, and I'm doing a loan in Florida right now. And Sally, maybe you can help me with this. I'm doing it in Siesta Key, which is, part of Sarasota. That condo I'm doing 2 years ago sold for $540,000. He got an accepted offer for $357,000. The underwriter's looking at this and wants him to put more down because of the depreciation in housing prices in Florida. I was blown away. So apparently there's a fire sale in Florida. Is that
Well, you said the dreaded word. You said condo.
Right.
and condo and on the water?
Condo.
Condo and like
and Siesta Key. Place like Vero, where we reside, we've got low density. So that's our big Teflon shield, is low supply. Even then, we've got like 4x more condos than we do single family homes.
yeah.
It's the whole post surf side, fear, awe, not knowing how to ask the right questions about the reserve studies, blah, blah, blah. And people
Right.
don't mind paying fees, but when it comes to like worrying about, is the building going to collapse? That's a whole nother matter.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
buyers need to recognize that right now is a moment where rates have dropped and they're kind of in a moderate place. As rates continue to drop, assuming they do, more and more people will start to come into the marketplace and make it more competitive, and then start to push price. So it's a matter of, do you secure a property now at a lower price where you can refinance in the future, or do you wait and compete to get it at a higher price if you can actually even secure it?
Right.
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 I think what we learned from the pandemic, where in my view, I always say this, the Fed kept rates too low for too long, is that we're still living in the distortion of that phenomenon still, because prices, in general when you have an economic slowdown, you see inventory pile up and then prices soften and then you move on. But we didn't have that, right? We had inventory sort of locked at a low level for a while. It certainly saw, more inventories coming in, but mostly in the Sun Belt, the northeastern United States is still challenged by supply. But the one thing I think we all learned during the pandemic is that when interest rates are too low or low, they actually make housing more expensive, in the near term. So people that are trying to time the market and like, I'm going to wait till rates fall a little bit more. I think, and I'm listen, I'm not selling, like, hey, get in now while the going's good. I'm just saying that it's a fact that as rates go down, the seller gets the same memo that the buyer gets. Like, it's not like exclusive to one party, right? And prices, drift higher as interest rates go down. It's just kind of the way it is. And
Yeah. So we always say, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times, you marry the house and you date the interest rate. Right.
I never say that, even though I know what you're saying. I never say that, but I get you. I totally get it.
It's just, you get in depending on whether you have to or not. But, the idea is to get in and then, you go through a market cycle every 7 to 10 years. So.
Right.
So let's go around the country a little bit. I heard before the show you were talking about, you said, well, I don't like to paint Florida with one brush. Certainly we've talked about the differences between New York City and Connecticut, for example. And you talked about the different kinds, even within a market, different kinds of product are behaving differently. So maybe it'd be useful to go around the country and talk about markets and what we're seeing in each of them.
So the way I think of this is the most important metric in housing today is inventory. It's more, I'd said earlier, like transactions, so sales and contracts, but I think inventory is a half step in front of that. And so if you look around the country, you look at Sun Belt, primarily Texas and Florida, tons of inventory, because during the pandemic migration, they were able to respond very quickly with more new construction, much faster than the Northeast, more land, just a faster, less red tape, whatever the reason. And now there's a surplus. You know, the poster child for this is Austin, Texas, where you've seen a tremendous amount of prices fall because they went up like a rocket ship, and now they're coming back
But
to
I just
sort of
heard the
normal.
word fire sale in connection with Florida, and I don't think that you can paint the entire state with
Right, it's
flooding.
silly.
No.
Like markets that Sally covers, like Vero Beach and like Palm Beach County, I do monthly contract. I have a month for Douglas Elliman. I have a monthly contract report where I look at just contracts signed in the current month and listings that are added in the current month, and they're rising. But then you have markets like Miami-Dade, which, that's where you had the Surfside condo, there's a broader disparity between the performance of resale condos and single family housing. I did a study, I don't know, probably
But
9 months
Surfside
ago.
Miami-Dade is shorthand for what? Older product?
Yes, 40-year-old condos.
And
And so
that's
the way
what's
to think
suffering?
about that market is think that the turnover, the churn of new product, meaning product built in the last decade, is turning over, meaning there's a lot more movement or a faster pace by about two times what the older product is. So you're seeing a market that's moving towards, the higher end. Luxury is probably more of an exaggeration, but just the upper half versus more evenly distributed. And you're seeing new development relative to resale, also moving faster as a result, because it's pivoting to more luxury. And then you look at the Gulf side of the market, and the Canadians that was their direction of choice. And with the tariffs, they're selling out. Like there's a tremendous, maybe some of it's for the last bunch of big hurricanes came up the Gulf side, and did a lot of damage. But that's a lot more supply in that market. So there's like these pockets of extreme differences, and you can't just paint Florida in one way. There's definitely a performance difference. Just to the Canadian thing and how important they are to Florida. In New York City, after coming out of the pandemic and we were the global hotspot, tourism has been, surged back, which is great for the economy. But with the implementation of tariffs, the Canadians, the New York City had to redo its tourism forecast. There will be in New York City 800,000. I think the total number of tourism is like 64 million of everybody, international and domestic. This year, 2025, they had earlier in the year, they had to revamp the tourism projections because 800,000 fewer Canadians are coming to New York City because of the tariffs. So you look at like these impacts coming out of policy that doesn't seem to like have some thought behind it. This is the uncertainty, right? And this is the weakening of the economy, why we've
So-
had a
So
million
a
jobs
follow-up to
lost in the
that,
last
to
year.
kind of contrast those two, is Surfside, an older stock, might be a long-term problem for that community, whereas you're saying the Canadian
Is a short-term policy.
might be a short-term issue
Correct.
for Naples, let's say.
Right. So the
Sarasota.
long-term view for the Gulf Coast, if the Canadian sort of less activity in that market, that's a couple of years probably, hopefully, to people that do business in that area. Whereas like Surfside was, oh my goodness, let's put safety in charge of people that are trying to keep the budget low, costs low, that are on fixed income. Like you talk about a conflict of interest, and in risk management, risk assessment, it was a horror show, and it's such a tragedy. So we don't want to ever
Right.
see that
So
again.
we've done Florida, and we heard from Sally the difference between houses and condos. It matters. You've talked about new construction versus 40-year-old stock. It matters. And then we've also talked about some markets like the West Coast affected by short-term policy. now do New York. Because all I heard about this morning was Mamdani this, Mamdani that. And I was like,
Yes.
really?
Yeah.
Really? So,
Yeah.
and the knock-on effect to Connecticut in the suburbs of the Mamdani effect. So is that a thing?
So
But there's the now pre-Mamdani, and if he gets in office,
what's real?
what actually will happen? What will be the effects?
So I personally, first of all, since I live in Connecticut, I can't vote in New York. So I'm like, I'm looking at it really from like, I've always been a champion of the city and want to see it succeed.
But you're getting ready to sell your Connecticut home to a New Yorker fleeing the city, right?
Absolutely not. Like
Oh.
I'm a very proactive, in sort of seeing New York City thrive. And I've been through a lot of cycles. I've been in the New York Metro. I'm not a native New Yorker. I'm Washington, D.C., or they call it the DMV native.
Where
And
exactly? Just curious.
I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland,
I grew up in Maryland.
and Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, which is the Hamptons of Washington, D.C.
I know all of that. I know all that.
Yeah, yeah. But in New York, my grandfather, when he was alive, my parents both grew up in Connecticut, and my grandfather used to tell me when I was in high school in Washington, D.C., he said, Jonathan, if you're not working in New York, then you're just camping out. And I somehow ended up back in New York. But I think it's wildly overhyped. It's like this idea that the mayor has all this power just seems remote. Now, New York City does have a tendency, especially back in 2019, of working against real estate through like the rent, the restrictions in rent and the ability to convert. Very sort of anti-developer and landlord has been sort of the take, um, forgetting that over 50% of the tax revenue for New York City comes from real estate in some form or the other. But I've also lived through a bunch of mayors, and I find that they can't do a tenth of what they promise. So there's something to be said about bureaucratic logjam or whatever. So I'm really not worried about it. I was a little surprised at the
Is it going to make
hyperbole.
buying opportunities in New York City in the short term? Over
In the
next
short
6
term,
months?
for sure, because you have people like, oh, I'm leaving. A lot of people, I remember, and this is probably a terrible comparison, but I remember during 9/11, there was this outbound migration because, oh my gosh, the city isn't safe, even though it ended up being the safest city in the country after 9/11 as a result. And within 3 years, there was the most of the migration returned. We actually had a net migration increase in the last 2 years, where the population actually grew because we had more inbound than outbound. So I just feel like the whole story is wildly overhyped. The more concern I have is it doesn't, is more like, is Washington DC policy going to wreak havoc on, federal funds that would normally come to New York that might not come? And how does that work with, is it going to be more taxes versus spending cuts? And I think it's going to be more taxes would be my guess. So I, for lack of a better answer, I just don't think it's a thing. It should be a thing.
So give Roberto some advice. Where is the New York market going? Roberto seems to be very optimistic for the last 6 months.
Although I lost a massive deal because of this issue.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. I do, the way I look at it is, so the concern right now, and it's more of a national issue, is higher interest rates have basically shut off the new development pipeline. And the reason for that is because land prices have
New
remained
York
elevated.
or are we talking New York City?
New York
Wherever?
City, New York
Okay.
City. Yeah, the new development pipeline is ending over the next couple of years. That
Is
you're
it
actually
also
going to
having an impact on renovations as well? Same?
what do you mean mean like if someone's rehabbing
And
or a
interest
gut
rates,
renovation?
you know, people with high and elevated interest rate environment, builders aren't taking chances. Does that money flow into renovations where we renovate old stock?
Yes, but maybe not dramatically because rates are still elevated, but it absolutely influences, improves that condition. The problem in New York is, I think a lot of it is interest rate, and then I think, um, we just aren't seeing the development pipeline. For example, in New York, I track shadow inventory. I don't do it, I do it a couple times a year because it's pretty labor intensive. And in 2020, sort of dark days of the pandemic, we had like 8.3 years of stock in the new development market, which is almost entirely condo. It's about 98% condo. The rest is condo. And and now it's about so it's normalized, right? That during the pandemic with the low rates, a lot of products sold off. The question is, you know, what's going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years? And I think that the pipeline is going to slow, which is going to make new development prices rise more than they would otherwise.
Pete
That's my theory.
Mikhalski is on the call. Scott, I see Scott on the call. Pete designs fabulous luxury homes. Scott builds luxury homes. Um, Pete's boss called me last week and said, I have a client who's thinking about a renovation, but if he can buy land in New Canaan, he'll do it. Is there any land to buy? And I said, sorry, there's nothing to buy. So a lot of these people, I think, are considering, do I renovate? I'll renovate. Ooh, look at those prices. Okay, I could consider building, but they're not interest rate sensitive, are they? I think. Can you tell me? I know I'm asking you to put on your economist hat. I think as long as the AI and a red hot stock market and earnings continue to perform, Pete's clients and Scott's clients and Roberto's cash clients at the high end market in New York are going to continue to buy and renovate. Yes? I think he might have frozen. Did you freeze?
Absolutely.
Oh, there we go. So it's a stock market driven. New York is still stock market dependent.
Yeah, so the way I think of it is so yes, although there's no real correlate. So let me back up. Last year, Wall Street had record profits and record compensation per employee, according to the New York State Comptroller's Office. This year, they're on track to do the same. So when you think about how new construction purchasing, high-end demand is going to fare next year, I think it's going to be pretty strong. This market is sort of the best in all the rest. That it's the high end that's sort of navigating around it's not high interest rates because historically the 30-year has averaged like just under 8%. It's like 7.7, I think. So, the fact that we're at 6.3 is we don't have high interest rates historically. They're just higher than the pandemic, which was insanely low. But I'm very optimistic about the higher end of the housing market in that context because compensation last year was good and this year is expected to be similar. What I'm more worried about is the lower end of the market, the lower half of the market, in the context of supply and demand, because of elevated rates. So like I was saying earlier, not to repeat myself, but the idea that the lower half of the market is where we're going to see the increase in significant action. Like if mortgage rates were to drop below 6% sort of symbolic threshold, and I'm usually not one to say that, but people have been waiting for so long for rates to fall that I think we're going to have another housing boom. I just don't think rates are going to fall below 6, but who knows? I don't know. But the boom, you're going to take a strong high end market, and then you're going to take a weak low half of the market, and it's going to be sort of charged up and explode if rates go down, because that's
What about foreign buyers? Because of the weakening dollar, are you seeing more foreign buyers?
no. And the reason, so you should, but immigration policy is a big reason why you have concerns, coming out of Asia, Europe, and South America. So what we're seeing, I only track it in Manhattan, but in Manhattan, our data, our expectation is in a sort of long-term average level in the condo market, we should see about 15% international, and we're seeing 6 to 8. And during like 2006-07, when we had massive currency play by international demand, we saw 40% of the 50% of the condo market was international. Nothing like that. And anecdotally, you are hearing some agents tell me, we're dealing with more international, but just market wide, one of the worries, like, as I like to say, the plural of anecdotal is not data. So when you have a couple of brokers telling you that they're seeing more international, I'm skeptical. I want to see, broader trends, and I don't seem to be seeing it yet. That certainly could happen, but that's only if immigration policy, I think, in the US changes significantly. And that's probably not going to be, best case is 3 years from now.
Yeah. Makes sense.
You want to go, Roberto, or should I?
Please.
I want to ask the Zoomtown question. With the pandemic, and we had Zoom towns, it reshuffled the real estate values around the country. A lot of people felt that they could move to places like, where are you? Ridgefield, Connecticut. They felt like they could suddenly live in Ridgefield, Connecticut, because they didn't have to get into Manhattan every day. And then they started to think, I can do my job from South Carolina or Idaho, and so are we going to see a reversal on that? Are we going to start to see an impact on real estate values in previously what I'd call Zoom towns? We're going to see a retreat, and that's another place where it might be dangerous to invest in real estate.
So I think the phenomenon, there was an overreaction, and you had markets, and some employers are like, hey, in fact, I had a CEO of a fairly large company in New York was telling me, yeah, you want to leave your in-office job in Manhattan and move to Maine? Well, we're going to adjust your salary for cost of living, right? And so there was some negative reaction to that. So I definitely think, just like Airbnb in the Southwest, like you have ghost towns, like there's the early adapters do well. But I think the narrative, I sort of chuckle every time I hear like Jamie Dimon or Fortune 500 execs talking about, we are going to go RTO, return to office. And then you look at why. And the reason is, they hold hundreds of billions of dollars in office, loans on commercial office buildings. They have a vested interest. They just built the most magnificent, beautiful, it's just an incredible building. It looks like it's on stilts on Park Avenue for their headquarters, but their old headquarters is half empty. So it's like you can sort of bang the drum all you want, and certain periods of time you're going to have an RTO, it's going to sort of ebb and flow between, I'm making this up, but like, 3 days a week in the office to 3.8 days a week in the office, kind of, and you have some people that are none or
Wait,
one
you are
day, and they have the whole
implying
gamut.
you are implying that Jamie Dimon is going to lose the war against, that he's having with his workforce, and that by implication, and he and everybody else, that New York is not going to experience an RTO, and New York, and it will
So
not benefit, it will not harm Maine to the benefit of New York City. Is that
so
what you're
I
saying?
guess it's I guess if you really want to tweak it to get SEO credit for your podcast, get more listeners to say something controversial. I mean, the way I look at it is look at the motivation. So if the motivation is not long term necessarily, then the drive to RTO versus the pushback, the long term is that some industries are going to have more RTO than work from home. It just ends the securities industry, financial markets seem to be. Bloomberg requires all its journalists to 5 days a week. Like, there's an old school sort of Fortune 500 thinking, and then there's everybody else. And so I think, man, the toothpaste is out of the tube, the cat's out of the bag, whatever you want. There'll be an ebb and flow, but it's not going to go back
I don't
to
want to hear ebb and flow.
pre-COVID.
If I'm Chuck Threshy's daughter and I just got my real estate license and I got to hang my hat somewhere, is Maine out? Are the suburbs out and cities are back,
No,
baby?
it's somewhere in between is the way I
Oh,
think of it. Uh, so I'm, that there, there's an overcorrection initially, and then there's a reset, but the reset is nowhere close to what it was originally. As the world sort of figures it out, is the way I think of it.
I can't put the
And so
headline out
they'll
tomorrow. Jamie Dimon was wrong, says Jonathan Miller,
No,
CR.
you can't.
Okay.
So
Okay.
here's the reason is that Jamie Dimon is dealing in Class A office space. There is Class B and Class C, and they are looking at, like the overall vacancy rate of Class A is much lower. It's sort of the parallel is luxury versus everything else. Class A, and it's really the upper half of Class A, has very high occupancy rate. Rest of Class A has noticeably less, and Class B and C is very poor. And as a result, we're already seeing a lot of Class C and the lower half of Class B. We have a tremendous amount of conversion office to residential, mostly rental in Manhattan, in New York City, but Manhattan specifically, there's a tremendous amount because that space is underutilized. People aren't going to the office in those buildings ever again, or very, very little. So when you watch the news and you listen to, Fortune 500 exec talk about how, RTO, we're going back to where we were. Remember, they're talking about Class A. They're not talking about the majority of the market, and all this sort of press about an increase in office leasing. Yeah, Class A, which is not representative of the entire office market.
So, John, crystal ball. This fall market in Manhattan is going to be robust, or it's going to be,
The
So
Yankees
first of
gonna
all,
win?
that's a even bigger question.
It is
So
related because
first,
it's
the
on my sheet
mandatory
here
display.
how dependent the real estate market is on sentiment. And I got to tell you, if the Yankees win and the Knicks win
Yes.
and the Giants and Jets get out of their own way, look out, New York. But go on, finish your
Yeah,
answer.
but yeah, as a Jets fan, my youngest son who's in his mid-20s. Every season he texts me and he says, "Thanks, Dad," because I made him a Jets fan and they always lose in the beginning of the season. So uh so when we think about what's going to happen in the fall, I would say we're off to a really good start in terms of, elevated activity. I don't think the spring market is going to be some massive record-setting booming market, but I think it's going to be what we would expect, meaning below normal sort of typical long-term levels of expectation. And I would say the fall is going to be very similar. If rates continue to fall, it's going to be very good because there's a tremendous amount of pent-up demand that has been building, people on the fence, and the rental market is at record prices, so that's a way to move people into purchases as well.
Jonathan,
So
can
I'm
you hear me?
optimistic about
We
the fall.
can.
Okay.
Yes,
sorry,
I can,
I'm in
Sally.
the car. Ivy Zelman was pretty negative when she came out. And so what indices and data points is she looking at that makes her say depreciative for next year and it won't be better till 2027?
I'm sorry, did you say Zelman, like Ivy Zelman?
Yeah, Ivy. Yeah, she came out
yeah.
yesterday or the day before. So what is causing her to say that, do you think?
Because she's looking at the national market.
All right. And you're talking about New York specifically. Okay. Got it.
New York City specifically, right, exactly.
Okay.
She's talking about national conditions.
Sally,
right?
we're talking about
and
the only
I think
market
the
that
logic
matters. Just joking.
And of course, you boys and
Yeah,
your toys.
that's-
If the teams win, I know. But what's interesting is it's also hyper local, though, right? I mean, like Vero, because of our policy, our supply is so limited that we kind of have Teflon a little bit. We're not really down, and our inventory is still 40% off pre-COVID. So I guess the headline is per usual. It's hyper local.
Hyper local for sure, and inventory is the barometer that you should be checking in with. If inventory is higher than pre-pandemic levels, it's probably going to be a soft market for pricing. And if inventory is lower, it's probably going to be a higher market in terms of pricing, but limited or below long-term norm in terms of sales levels.
All right.
Well,
So
and
I don't
supply
know.
and demand, right, John? You've got a supply problem, right? We have a demand problem.
We all have a supply problem. Yes.
Yeah,
Correct.
but we don't. We have a demand problem.
Yes.
I'm gonna. Well, we'll send
Right.
you a few customers
Right.
who can't find anything up
Okay.
here.
Okay.
I want to thank
to talk to
our
everybody.
sponsor, gracefarms.org. You can find them at gracefarms.org. They've got some great programs coming up this fall. Check out gracefarms.org and buy some tea and coffee and support their mission. Housingnotes.com. That's where you're going to find Jonathan Miller every day publishing really interesting.
It's
economic
fabulous.
data.
You learn
Fabulous.
something amazing every time.
Yep.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Must read.
I got some,
And very funny.
Thank you.
All that
Yeah,
snark
that's-
and sarcasm
Yeah.
in Florida's funniest agent yesterday. Yep. So
Yeah.
must read Jonathan Miller's housingnotes.com. You'll find me at the engelteam.com. You'll find Roberto at robertocabrera.com, and boroughsandburbs.com has all the shows. You'll see this show up within the hour at boroughsandburbs.com. Thank you, Jonathan. This has been awesome.
Thank you, Chuck. Too.
My pleasure. Anytime. I appreciate you
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Sally in Vero Beach, Sally Daly.
Thanks for having me.
Ciao.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks, Chuck.
And thank you, Pete Mikowski.
How many times will we have you before 300? That's what I want to
7 more.
know.
That's true. 7 more.